Listen for words of faith in the poem Stay by Jan Richardson. I know how your mind rushes ahead, trying to fathom what could follow this. What will you do? Where will you go? How will you live? You will want to outrun the grief. You will want to keep turning towards the horizon, watching for what was lost to come back, to return to you and never leave again. For now, hear me when I say all you need to do is to still yourself, is to turn toward one another, is to stay. Wait and see what comes to fill the gaping hole in your chest. Wait with your hands open to receive what could never come except to what is empty and hollow. You cannot know it now, cannot even imagine what lies ahead. But I tell you, the day is coming when breath will fill your lungs as it never has before, and with your own ears, you will hear weird words coming to you, new and startling. You will dream dreams, and you will see the world ablaze with blessing. Wait for it. Still yourself. Stay. For words of spiritual insight in contemporary expression, we give thanks.
Listen for words of faith in the Gospel from Luke. That same day, 2 of the disciples were making their way to a village called Emmaus. It was about 7 miles from Jerusalem, discussing all that had happened as they went. While they were discussing these things, Jesus approached and began to walk along with them, though they were kept from recognizing Jesus, who asked them, "And what are you two discussing as you go on your way?" They stopped and they looked sad. One of them, Cleopas by name, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that has happened in these past few days?" Jesus said to them, "What things?" They said, "About Jesus of Nazareth, a prophet, powerful in word and deed in the eyes of God and of all people. How our chief priests and leaders delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified. We were hoping that he was the one who would set Israel free. Besides all of this, today, the 3rd day since these things happened, some women of our group have just brought us some astonishing news. They were at the tomb before dawn and didn't find the body. They returned and informed us that they'd seen a vision of angels who declared that Jesus was alive. Some of our number went to the tomb and found it to be just as the women had said. But they didn't find Jesus. And then Jesus said to them, what little sense you have. How slow you are to believe all that the prophets have announced. Didn't the Messiah have to undergo all of this to enter into glory?" And then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, Jesus interpreted for them every passage of Scripture which referred to the Messiah. By now, they were near the village they were going to, and Jesus appeared to be going on further. But they said eagerly to him, No, stay with us. It's nearly evening. The day is practically over." So the Saviour went in and stayed with them. And after sitting down with them to eat, Jesus took bread, said the blessing, broke the bread, and began to distribute it to them. And with that, their eyes opened and they recognized Jesus, who immediately vanished from their sight. And they turned to each other and said, "Weren't our hearts burning inside us as this one talked to us on the road and explained the scriptures to us?" And they got up immediately, returned to Jerusalem, where they found the 11 and the rest of the company assembled. And they were greeted with, "Christ has risen. It's true. Jesus has appeared to Simon." And then the travellers recounted what had happened on the road and how they'd come to know Jesus in the breaking of the bread. For the word that was in the beginning, for the word that invites and inspires, for the word embodied in us, we give thanks.
Good morning. In June 2021, God seemed to simply disappear from my life. Some might call this a dark night of the soul experience. I'd heard Mother Teresa had had a similar experience, and so I had great expectations that I was in very good company. All would be well. Our journey through this blimp in my spiritual life become real holy, and I'd be an even better Salvation Army officer than I had been for the past 25 years. Well, in April 2024, almost 3 years later, I chose to resign from being a Salvation Army officer. The only vocation I had truly known in my life, and the only vocation I had anticipated being in until death. You see, the dark night of the soul moment in 2021 snowballed into a complete deconstruction of my faith. My understanding of God fully unravelled, and I even wondered if I was going to become an atheist or at least agnostic. My long-held beliefs changed, and I could no longer, in good conscience and with integrity, remain an officer in the Salvation Army. I didn't become an atheist or agnostic. Today, I would describe myself as a progressive Christian, one who follows the way of Jesus, whose cottage, as Pastor David Hayward likes to describe it, is found in Christianity, but who has the utmost admiration for and likes to journey with those whose cottages are found outside of Christianity. Creeds no longer define me. You could say the past few years have indeed been an Emmaus Road experience, a combination of deep loss and despair, coupled with a new dawning or awakening, and I must say, a much humbler understanding of the divine presence. John Shelby Spong, in his book Resurrection, Myth or Reality, speaks of Easter dawn. Where were the disciples when Easter dawned? In whom did Easter dawn? When did Easter dawn? In what context did Easter dawn? Immediately we conjure up dawning imagery, and no doubt the phrase, "it dawned on me." There's this morning prayer that I recite almost daily, written by Philip Newell. It goes like this: "O sun behind all suns, soul within all souls, grant me the grace of the dawn's glory, grant me the strength of the sun's rays, that I may be well in my own soul and part of the world's healing this day, that I may be well in my own soul." and part of the world's healing this day. English theologian Thomas Fuller once wrote, "It's always darkest just before the day dawneth." Well, there's no doubt that in this gathering here this morning, both in the room and those joining us online, that many have travelled a dark night, an Emmaus road. And as I speak, you are recalling that moment, and for some, the dark experience is in this very present moment. I would even suggest that collectively humanity is indeed living in very dark days, full of grief, despair, and perhaps a sense of hopelessness. Certainly for the followers of Jesus, the days post-crucifixion were dark. Death of their beloved rabbi, the absence of their teacher and friend, hopes of being delivered from an oppressive regime shattered, fear of being the next, and I quote, the next to be executed for non-violent resistance against violent imperial justice. That's John Dominic Crossan. Dark days indeed, as they walk away filled with disbelief and despair at what they'd just witnessed, and any great expectations they may have had are shattered. This dawning moment that they did have, this sense of knowing, this sense of seeing the presence of the divine, is referred to in our reading from the Gospel of Luke. There's two occasions. Verse 32, weren't our hearts burning inside us as this one talked to us on the road and explained? And then again in verse 35, how they had come to know Jesus in the breaking of the bread. At some point, something dawned in them, a knowing moment, an encounter with the divine. And there are two observations that I take from our reading today, and certainly two that I resonated deeply with during my own Emmaus Road journey. That the dawning experience, when life seems particularly dark, can happen in the very ordinary and in the company of others. Cleopas and another disciple were simply walking and discussing all that had happened when their hearts were burning. They were at a meal table, breaking bread when their eyes were opened. They were very much in an ordinary setting, engaging with ordinary material, bread, wine. Well, in the Salvation Army, it's non-alcoholic. It's something else. Lemon, lime and bitters, I believe. When the presence of the divine dawned on them, dawned in them. Richard Rohr writes, the core message of the incarnation of God in Jesus is that the divine presence is here, in us, in all of creation, and not only over there in some far-off realm. The purest form of spirituality is to find God in what is right in front of you, on the road, around the table. An encounter with the divine presence does not require some monumental gathering of the saints, nor a special location, or thanks be to God, no major planning committee. Instead, two people, downcast and forlorn on a walk, the sun rising or setting, the willy wagtail along the back fence, the moon on a clear evening. In my journey, it has definitely been in the ordinariness of birds. Once, after a session with my spiritual director while still in the trenches of deconstruction, so I was in the trenches of deconstruction silently while still carrying out my duties as a minister. It was quite traumatic. And I had been with my spiritual director and I was taking a moment by the water. We were in Perth, by the way. taking a moment by the water and just breathing before I get on with my day. And I saw this bird just glide into the sky, free as a bird, right? And I can remember whispering, I just want to be free, like the bird. I just want to be released from constraints of a theology I no longer align with. And yet I'm riddled with fear of resigning and not knowing what lies ahead. And in that moment, I felt a deep sense of the presence of God. My heart was burning, my eyes were opened, that it was going to be okay. It was okay to resign and that all would be well. A dawning moment in a very ordinary day. Notice also that the dawning occurred not in isolation, but in the presence of others. Walking with a friend on the road to Emmaus, sitting around the meal table. Now, I am not suggesting that you cannot experience the divine presence on your own, for as I just illustrated, we know this also to be true. However, there's this underlying thread within the Christian tradition that emphasises the strength and the power and the necessity of living life in community. Why the imagery of the Trinity is often described as a dance. The perichoresis is the word used, the dance of the Trinity, where Creator, Christ, and Spirit complement one another, each contributing a uniqueness not to be found in the other. And the invitation is for all of creation to join in this dance, to be part of this community of Trinity. Each of us bringing our own uniqueness into the dance, into the world. Now, I know the image on the front of today's liturgy reflects our reading from the Gospel of Luke. However, when I first glanced at it, I thought the imagery was the painting titled The Trinity, created by a Russian painter. Some of you may be familiar with it. Andrei Rublev in the 15th century has a beautiful painting of the Trinity. And at first sight, I thought I was looking at it this morning. Again, when I was in the trenches of deconstruction and when I had lost the only faith community I had ever really known, it was in finding a new community, like-minded people, where once again I encountered an Easter dawning. I would discover an author whose writings just lit me up on the inside. An online community where a blog or podcast just had me saying, yes, that makes sense to me. And Pitt Street Uniting Church, even from Perth, it was your liturgy and your understanding of God that excited me and made me feel no longer alone in my new understanding of God. I don't know if you realise that. An Easter dawning experience doesn't necessarily remove the darkness, but rather brings with it an incredible life-changing power, as Spong describes it, as we journey through the darkness. Followers of Jesus still had many dark days ahead, but no longer for them was there this dependence upon only experiencing the divine presence in the human Jesus. But rather, this Easter dawning was to discover that the divine presence was eternally with them, within them, and within the other in this life. Be the days ahead dark or light, the road ordinary or spectacular. Julian of Norwich, there's a quote that's sometimes only half quoted. It says, all will be well and all shall be well and all manner of things shall be well. But the quote goes on to say, for there is a force of love moving through the universe that holds us fast and will never let us go. May we carry this dawning experience into our current circumstances. May we encounter the divine presence in the ordinary and in the company of the other. May we collectively carry the light of the divine presence into this dark world. Pitt Street Uniting, you were the companion on the road with me while I deconstructed, and you have been a source of comfort in my grief and loss. It has been 2 years and 3 months since I last stood before a congregation and preached a sermon. Today I am grateful for my Emmaus experience and the Easter dawning that has brought me to this moment and this reflection. I'm also originally from Belfast, Northern Ireland. I was born there and lived there till I was 12. And my deconstruction journey has also led me back to my Celtic roots. And so I leave with you this blessing from the Irish poet and author John O'Donoghue. May you travel in an awakened way, gathered wisely from your inner ground, that you may not waste the invitations which wait along the way to transform you. Let's just take a moment to reflect. Thank you.